Good evening. Tonight I have yortzeit for my mother, Zechrona Livrocha, and I am dedicating the time and the Divrei Torah Le'ilui Nishmaso, Le'ilui Nishmas Imi Morasi Sarah Rezel Bas Dov Meir. This week's Parsha is Parshas Beshalach. And it's also Shabbos Shira because incorporated into Parshas Beshalach is Oz Yoshir when the Yidden left Mitzrayim and they got to the destination of where they had to be, and they then said Shira as they were going over the Yam. Now, the very first word of the parsha is Vayehi Beshalach Paro Es Ha'am V'lo Nocham Elokim Derech Eretz Pelishtim Ki Koravu Ki Amar Elokim Pen Yinochem Ha'am V'shavu Mitzrayim. The very first pasuk says that they went out and Hashem didn't let them go the shortcut. Derech Pelishtim, because he said, and the pasuk says it, that maybe along the way they're going to have hesitancy and they're going to want to return to Mitzrayim. So I'm taking them the long route, so they'll be too far away, so even if they have some regrets, they won't come back. Now, the Medrash talks about this first word, Vayehi. First, the Medrash says that it was Paro, because Vayehi, as I've said to you on occasion, Vayehi is a lashon of tsar, sadness. V'hoya is a lashon of simcha. Now, why would Paro, because the Medrash first says it was Paro, then it says it was the Yidden. So let's delve into each one for just a moment. Paro, it said there was a sadness. Now, why would Paro be sad? He rushed them out. They had dead people in every house was a dead Mitzri. He couldn't wait to get rid of them. So what was he so sad about? So the Medrash brings down a mashal that there was a man who was in the middle of a valley or the middle of a desolate place, and somebody came over to him and said, I have this strand of pearls, and I have no value and no use for them. Maybe you'd like them. So the man said, yeah, I'll take them. And their journeys continued, and they came out a month later in the same town. Now, the person who took the pearls decided to set up a table and put some of the larger pearls in one pile and some of the medium-sized pearls in another pile, and then the small ones. And it just so happened that the person who gave him the pearls, this is what the Medrash says, this story, that the man who gave the pearls over because he thought they were useless stood nearby to see what this man who now had taken the pearls and put them on the table to see how much he could fetch, how much he could sell them for. So somebody came a few minutes later and said, how much are the pearls? So he picked up a small one, and he said, these value at $100,000 each. And the medium size, $500,000. And the big ones, $1 million. So the man standing by and heard what's going on, he gave out a scream. What opportunity did I give up? And that the Medrash says is Vayehi. Vai! Paro scrimped, because he realized when he saw the Yidden leaving, even though he hated them, and even though he was killing the children, and even though at this point he was happy to get rid of them, but when he realized that the Yidden, their value was free labor, they were building the houses, the pyramids, the everything. This was free. He gave out a scream, Vayehi, and that the Medrash says is why we use the lashon of Vayehi and not Vahaya. But then the Medrash continues and says it was the Yidden, the Jews, who screamed out Vayehi. Now, why would they scream out? They couldn't wait. They were waiting 210 years to get out of there. And now was their chance, their liberation, their freedom. So, the Medrash says that there are three opinions. You see, in our parsha, like at the end of the 4th or 5th pasuk, it says, V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Chamushim means, according to one pshat Rashi brings it, weaponry. That when Klal Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim, they went with weaponry. Now they had in those days, no machine guns. They had no, so what do you mean weaponry? So the Mefarshim explain that they had such chusim that they were able to encounter miracle after miracle. That every place that there was a little bit of a hill and they were going in that direction, had the hills remained there, they would have had to go up and down and around, and they would, and right before they got to the first hill, it smoothed out flat. And the second and the third, so they never had to go. And if you've ever gone from Yerushalayim down to Eilat, they have signs along the way. This is Midbar Paran. This is Midbar Tzin. All these midbars that are mentioned in the Chumash, they have a sign telling you that you are now looking at Midbar Tzin, where the Yidden were traveling up and back and forth in the thing. Now, the Medrash says the word Vachamushim, although most teach it to mean armed, that they had schusim and they had different things to be able to encounter the Mitzrayim and to be able to have all of these nisim and miracles, l'malam and ateva, happen. But there's another taich in the Medrash. Vachamushim, there was only 1 out of every 5 who survived Mitzrayim. Another statement in the Medrash, it was only 1 out of every 50 who survived. 49 died and 1 survived. And then there's a third opinion in the Medrash, it was 1 out of every 500. Because when they were in Mitzrayim, there were a lot of Yidden that were waiting and longing for the Geula. Those Yidden merited to leave Mitzrayim. But those people who said, I'm not waiting for the Geula, whoever knows if it's going to happen, we don't see things moving, and if it's not happening, it's not happening. Those people in the middle of the Makkah, the plague of darkness. Now there were 10 plagues. The 9th was Choshech. And as I told you in the past, that Choshech was thickness, v'yamesh Choshech, that the Mitzrayim couldn't move. Wherever that darkness was, if a Mitzri was standing, he stood standing for 3 days. If he was sitting, he remained at that table and that chair, sitting for 3 days. And I told you that the Yidden came in to feed them, and that's why they became friendly. And the pasuk says, Me'es Reusa, which it didn't say in Parshas Shemos, when it said about going and taking the gold and silver, but here it says it. So during those 3 days of complete darkness, for the Yidden it wasn't dark. And all those Yidden, those millions who had to die and not leave Mitzrayim, died during those 3 days of darkness. And Hashem wanted it that way because He didn't want the Mitzrayim to be able to say, oh, the Jews claim that they have miracles and they're going to be leaving Egypt. Look what's happening to them. They're burying their dead. And the Yidden, during those 3 days, buried millions. But the commonly used term is the 1 out of the opinion, 1 out of 5. Now, imagine when the Yidden were leaving Mitzrayim, and they were happy in the basic sense, but when they noticed that, wait a second, where's my next door neighbor? Where's my 3 cousins? Where's all my friends? They died and they were buried? So I'm leaving. So Vayehi is a lashon of tsar, because even though they were happy to leave, but when they realized how many people, 80 out of every 100, died out and was not leaving with them, there was a sadness. So there was a mixture of some happiness and some sadness. And that's what the Medrash says is the Vayehi. Either it goes on Paro that he was moaning and groaning, or it was the Yidden who were moaning and groaning at the loss of so many Yidden. Now, the pasuk right after that says, Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. Meforshim discuss, many of the Meforshim, why does it say the word imo? With him. We know that Yosef, this was not some big achievement. I mean, there was a promise made to Yosef. They were going to take his body, his bones, out of Mitzrayim and bury him in Shechem. And Moshe Rabbeinu, when the pasuk says that everyone was running around gathering gold and silver, so the Medrash says, Chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs. And that pasuk in Mishlei is going on Moshe Rabbeinu. Because while everyone was running around gathering gold and silver, Moshe Rabbeinu was looking for the Aron, the body of Yosef, because he said, we can't leave without it. We made a promise that he's going to be taken out, and he's got to be taken out. So as I told you, they went to Serach Bas Asher. She took him over to the Nile and showed where Klal Yisrael, when Yosef died, threw in his body. And Moshe Rabbeinu took the parchment, and it said, Ale Shor, that Yosef was strong like an ox and fighting his Yetzer Hara, and pulled up the body. And then they were leaving. But it could have said, Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef ito, with him. Because imo and ito basically mean the same thing. So why? And it doesn't say imahem, with them, that they took the Aron of Yosef with them. It says with him. So does that mean Moshe Rabbeinu? But Meforshim say it means each and every Yid. And the reason that Moshe Rabbeinu was so affirmative that we must leave, because Yosef, as I've told you, was the only one referred to as Hatzadik. Avram was Avinu, Yitzchak was Avinu, Yaakov was Avinu, Moshe was Rabbeinu, Aaron was HaKoyen, David was HaMelech, but Tzaddik was only Yosef HaTzaddik. Now, tzaddikim have a tremendous power, whether they're alive or they're nifter. We know that there are 5 chalokim to the soul, to the neshama. One is nefesh, that's the lowest. Then there's ruach. Then there's neshama. Then there's chaye, and then there's yechida. The Zohar HaKadosh in Parshas Kisavo says that the nefesh remains at the cemetery with the nifter after he's buried. That's why we can go and cry at a grave and they hear every single word that we are saying, and we daven to them, not out of just sympathy or emotion, but out of actuality, to ask for something, to gain something, to get something from the nifter. And it says that people, no matter how big they are here in Olam Hazeh, but once they divest themselves of the physicality and the body, they're even bigger because they're only pure spiritual. So, Yosef was the paradigm, was the pinnacle, was the turret of Kedusha and Tahara. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that when he was carrying that Oron of Yosef HaTzaddik, that it should drench and permeate and become etched into the essence of each and every Yid, all that Tahara and all that Kedusha. And that's why it says Imo, because Imo is an individual. Should have said Imohem, that he took the Oron of Yosef with them. But it says with him, because he wanted each and every Yid to be able to be touched and completely encompassed and, like I said, drenched with that Kedusha and that Tahara. And that Moshe Rabbeinu succeeded, say the Sfarim, that when he carried it and people came by it and cried and spoke and davened to Yosef, that he was able to be such an effective goodwill ambassador on behalf of Klal Yisrael in terms of the area of Tahara and Kedusha. Now, we know that and the word ito just means you're going along with. But imo means part and parcel of the person you're with. That it becomes part of your essence. And that's the reason it says imo and not ito. Now, at the beginning of the Parsha, right after this Vayikach Moshe es Atzmos Yosef, it says, V'omar paro livnei Yisrael, nevuchim heim ba'aretz, that the Jews left Mitzrayim, and they're stranded. The word nevuchim means stranded. He made it up. They don't know where they're going, they don't know where they're heading. Now the pasuk says he said it, livnei Yisrael. So Rashi picks up right away. I mean, the Jews all left. So what do you mean Paro was speaking to the Jews? So Rashi says it means about the Jews. He said it to Mitzrayim, but he was talking about the Jews when he said Nevuchim Heim Ba'aretz. But the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says differently. And he says he was speaking to the Jews. Now, who was in Mitzrayim? They already left, they were already over. They were already right next to the Yam, ready to go through it. So who was Paro talking to? At that point, if Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, indeed it was Yidden he was speaking to. So he explains it was Dasan and Aviram. Now we know that these two troublemakers were the backbone and the reason why Klal Yisrael kept complaining, and there was one Magefa after another in the Midbar. They cried about there was no meat. They cried about this. They cried. All this crying. Oh, thank you. All of this crying was motivated and instigated by Dasan and Aviram. So how could the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel say that Paro was talking to Jews and say it was Dasan and Aviram? They ended up in the Midbar, but they didn't. They weren't there by Kriyas Yamsuf. So how did they get there? Now, and Dasan and Aviram were Rishoyim. Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away, that he went and said to Paro, you know that kid that grew up in your palace is killing your people. That when Moshe went out, Vayetze Bayom Hasheni, and he saw Vayar, Ish Mitzri, Makeh, Ish Ivri, Me'achav. So it was Dasan that was being beaten on, and Moshe Rabbeinu saved him. He killed with the Shema Meforish the Mitzri, and he buried him right there in the sand. And the next day, Dasan went into Paro and said, oh, that kid is killing your people. He snitched on him, and he had to become a fugitive. Vayivrach Moshe, Vayivakesh Paro, Laharogas Moshe, the pasuk says. So he had to run away, and he ended up in Midian, he ended up by Yisro. So this Russia was in Mitzrayim and did not leave with Klal Yisrael, yet we find him in the Midbar shortly thereafter. So the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel explains that they were in Mitzrayim after all the Jews left, but they ended up, when they decided to leave, they went to the water, and there was again a splitting of the sea, which means there was a Kriyas Yamsuf just for these two Rishoyim. How could that be? What the schus of a Kriyas Yamsuf, that the water's splitting, I mean, that's supernatural, maybe the biggest public miracle ever happened in the world. And it was done for those two bandits. So, excuse me that I keep drinking. I'm just so, as I said, it's my mother's yortzeit, and they made we had a Suda, and we learned lots of Mishnayos, so I spoke about her, so I'm just so thirsty, forgive me. So he says, why did they have the schus, that the sea, that the Red Sea, that the Yamsuf split for them? Because, you know, in Mitzrayim, the Jews became officers for the Mitzrayim. That means who was looking over the Jews to see if they produced such and such the amount of bricks that they had to do every day? It was other Jews. And if they didn't produce the number, the Jews were supposed to hit the Jews who didn't produce it. And of all the people, it was Dasan and Aviram who were officers and refused to beat the other Jews. And the Mitzrayim said to them, as the Yalkut brings, oh, you're not beating the Jews who didn't produce the amount of what they had to produce for that daily ration? So we're going to beat you up. And they beat them up, and they said, we would rather be beaten up than have to beat another Jew. So they were Taka Rishoim Gemurim, but the level of Mesiras Nefesh that they had for another Yid propelled them to the highest of heights, that they were Zoicha to a splitting Kriyas Yamsuf Nachamal again, just because of their Mesiras Nefesh. And they were able to remain and then make their way through to the whole Klal Yisrael and cause their further trouble there. But that was because of the schus of what they did in terms of being painfully beaten upon. Not to do it in to another Yid. And from this, we learn the value of helping a Yid, whether it's helping carry a package that he's struggling with to get from place A to place B, or whether it's coming to help him eat, or to go to the store that it takes him 3 hours to get there and 3 hours to get back, and you could do it in 15 minutes and you buy the items. Whatever you're doing to make easy the load of another Yid, there is tremendous reward and acknowledgement. Now, I want to say to you that you know that when the Yidden left Mitzrayim, in our Parsha, that I just told you that so many died, and only one went out. Now let's say there were 5 families in Mitzrayim, on one block or wherever they lived. And 4 of the fathers died, Nebuch, in the time of darkness. 1 lived. So the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel asks, when they were all leaving, who took care of the families? The fathers were dead. So it was the 5th one who lived out of every 5 who took care, and that's what it means. He teaches, Vachamushim olu b'nei Yisrael, that when b'nei Yisrael went up, and families who were little children lost their fathers, needed guidance, needed strength, needed encouragement, needed direction. Who did it? The 5th one of the 5 who survived. And he took care of the 5 families. So says the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. Now, as they were traveling the Yidden, they had no water, and they found a pond of water, a small gathering of water, and they went to drink, and it was bitter. So bitter that they complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what am I supposed to do? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you see that tree over there? Take that tree and throw it into the water, and it's going to become as sweet as could be, and that's what happened. So the Meforshim are curious, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell him to take a tree? First of all, it was a pure miracle, so he could have just in a second made the water sweet. Or throw something else in. Why did he choose specifically a tree? So the answer the Meforshim say is because everything in the Torah is a message to Klal Yisrael l'dorei doros. Because the Meforshim compare a tree to a man. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. And we are celebrating always after Parshas Beshalach it is mashpia on the week, and usually Chamisha Asar Bishvat comes out during that week. What do we celebrate on Chamisha Asar Bishvat? Not the fruits. The fruits we are in judgment of how sweet and how good and how beautiful and how colorful and all of that fruits will be on Shavuos. It says, look in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Ba'atzeret HaPeiros HaIlan Nidoinen are judged how good and how sweet they'll be, Ba'atzeres, on Shavuos. Now we take fruits on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat because we're celebrating the trees, and a tree, what should it be proud of and happy about? That which came into existence because of them. So we take out of appreciation and out of accentuation the tree by showing what its peiros are. It's like a father has a son that learns well, does well, or a son who excelled in chesed. He's proud. Why? Because he produced that human being. And that's what the trees are so happy to see us making a bracha, Borei Peri Ha'etz En Shechianu, on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. And that's the reason why Min HaShamayim it comes out that the celebration of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat is always in the week of Beshalach, either before or after in the week that comes up, or on Shabbos Beshalach, or right after that the Shabbos is Mashpia. Why? Because a human being is compared to a tree. Because a tree, the seed goes into the ground, you don't see anything happening, you see darkness, you have to toil to work up and to bring to fruition that seed by watering, by plowing, by sowing, by everything that we have to do till finally something comes out and then a tree comes. And that is the message of throwing a tree into the water specifically. Because learn from the tree, humanity, because the tree is something that develops from zero to fruition to produce all the fruit of the world. And just like a tree whose bark is so sour, so bitter, that you can work into existence the reality of ultimate success, growth, and positivity from the tree. That a human should never give up. The Meforshim say what I'm saying to you, that you could give up a person, even on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, it says in most countries where it's cold and hot, it's still 100% cold, or there's snow out there. You don't even see the tree. What are we being so happy and making these brachos? You don't even see the trees half the time. But then it suddenly comes to life. And that's what happened with this tree in the water. It was bitter. They couldn't put the water in their mouths. But then suddenly, in a moment, the sweetness came abundantly. And that's the message to man, that when you're down, that you lost your job, or you have no parnasa, or there was nebuch death, lo aleinu, lo aleichem, in the family, or there was an accident and somebody is in the hospital, you should know you're down and out, you're human, you have every reason and right to be broken, but things are going to get bright. The bitterness is going to turn sweet. You know, there was somebody who was in Crown Heights one Shabbos who had never been in Crown Heights. This happened around 40 years ago. And he was not a Lubavitcher. And he decided he wanted to see what was doing inside of 770 and see what the Rebbe looked like. And so he went. He was there for a family simcha in Crown Heights. So in the afternoon, he walked into the shul and he heard the Rebbe speaking about Yemos HaMashiach and about Tchias HaMesim. So on Sunday, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. And he wrote in the letter, I came in, I heard the Rebbe speaking, and it could be I didn't understand. But the Rebbe was saying that right after Mashiach comes, shortly thereafter, that tzaddikim will come in Tchias HaMesim, and then the Hamon, the multitudes of people, will shortly thereafter stand up. But the Arizal in 3 places writes that when Mashiach comes, 8 years later, he writes, then will be Tchias HaMesim, 24 years later, and 40 years later. So, and the Rebbe made it sound like it was going to be immediate. So the Rebbe answered him and said, you understood me correctly. And I'm aware of the Kisvei Ari, what he writes, but I can assuredly assure you that even the Arizal himself today admits that there will never be 8 years, 24, or 40, because what Klal Yisrael in these 450 years had to go through, and the tragedies and the devastation and the massacres and the crusades and everything they went through, which was the darkest of the dark, you're going to see how it's going to end up in the luster and the sunshine of their dancing and their rejoicing of how the world changed. And that is the reason that Oz Yosher is in this parsha. In other words, if you're wondering why would the Torah put right here in Beshalach Oz Yosher, and obviously the answer is because they just left Mitzrayim and that's where they said the Shira. But then the Anshe Knesset Gedola put it into our Psuke de Zimra. Now, from the beginning of davening, after we say Korbanos, it is one basic exuding and extolling the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Look at the hallelujahs that we say. Look at Ashrei, every line. Look at what's there. So, Meforshim say that when we finish Psuke de Zimra, we end off with the very last thing that we say before we go into the Olam Habriya, into the world of actual Tefillah and Krishma and Shemona Esrei. We leave off all that praise with Oz Yosher, because singing praise is beautiful, and it's something that expresses poetry and the beauty and dignity of Lashon HaKodesh that is part of the Torah. And we end off our entire Psuke de Zimra because praise and everything is wonderful. However, there is nothing more than pure emunah. And that is what Oz Yosher, and that is the reason that pure emunah carries the day with us, because the Gemara darshans, Oz Yosher Moshe. And the Gemara says, Yashir is a lashon of us, the future. But they were singing then. So why doesn't say Oz Shor Moshe, that he telling us the story of what happened? So the Gemara says the reason that the word Shor is not written, But Yosher is the future tense because it's a mikan. From here we learn that Tchias HaMesim is min HaTorah, that the resurrection of the dead, Liosad Lavo, has its root in the Torah and its source of where does the Torah mention it and validate the whole concept of Tchias HaMesim, that it comes right there in the Parsha of Beshalach. Because after all of the darkness, it'll answer all of our questions, and we'll have our people back with us. And that is the theme of Psuke de Zimra. And as we're praising, but we have to make one loud acknowledgement of Emunah, untouched, pure, undiluted, pure Emunah and Bitochon. So praise is wonderful, but we have to know what the essence of that is to bring us to. And that's why we sign off in Psuke de Zimra with statement of Oz Yosher, because that's what it's all about, and all roads lead to that Emunah. And then we begin the davening. So and that is the reason that if you look in Oz Yosher, the Mitzrayim are not mentioned even once. Because this was, Paro tried to make himself a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He tried to make himself like he was a god. It says it beferish. He didn't want the people to look at him like a king. He wanted them to look at him like a god that, didn't even have to use the washroom. He tried to fool them that he was a god. So Oz Yosher was a proclamation of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech Malchei Hamlochem, and there are no two gods. That there is the proclamation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, His deity, His oneness, and that's how we're able to proclaim Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now, at the end of the Parsha, we come to a section of 9 psukim which talk about Amalek attacking Klal Yisrael. And as you know, it says that Aaron and Yehoshua stood on each side of Moshe. He picked up his hands. Klal Yisrael were beating the Amalek to a pulp. When he put down his hands to rest, Amalek had the upper hand. So they put like a stone that the hand should be up without exerting his strength to hold it up, to hold them up. And then they won. Now the pasuk says that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Bachar lonu anoshem v'tzei lochem ba'Amalek." Choose men and go out and fight Amalek. Machar, tomorrow. Anochi nitzav al rosh hahar, ushtei avonim biyodi. And the Gemara is debating, what does that word machar, where does it belong to? Is it the last word of the first half of the pasuk, Bechar lonu anoshem, v'tzei lochem ba'Amalek, machar, tomorrow you should do it? Or is it en tzei lochem ba'Amalek, and machar anochi nitzav al rosh hahar, tomorrow I'm going to stand up. So where does that word mocher? It's a debate in the Gemara. Where does this word mocher belong attached to? So Mefarshim say that this is the story of Amalek that seeks to pull us down to the lowest of low. Because when we take on to do something and it's noteworthy, it's a very beautiful undertaking, it's an uplifting experience if we do it to our neshamas, to our own frame of mind, we do the good thing that we decided to do. And then the Yetzer Hara steps in and he says, oh yeah, it is wonderful and you should do it. But aren't you so tired from the day to day that mocher, do it tomorrow. I'm not telling you not to do it, but I'm telling you do it. But do it tomorrow. Till the person comes to the point that he never does it. And that's why the Gemara debates where does it belong, because the whole pasuk's talking about Amalek. But what is the part of the pasuk, the trick of Amalek, to try to get us to slip and slide on the terrain or on the sidewalk or where we are in doing what we accepted and took upon ourselves to do faithfully and truthfully as Yidden? And that word Anochi, Nitzav, Al Rosh Hagiva, or the beginning, B'char Lanu Anoshem, that is the way of bringing down Yidden, because Yidden lived their lives to do the right thing, to do the mitzvah, to get the schus. And the Yetzer Hara, it says, was appointed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have a slip. And when we fight off the Yetzer Hara, the Medrash says, Beferish, that the Yetzer Hara itself is dancing. It's happy it failed in its mission. Its mission it has to do, to try to get you to slip and to fall. But if you don't do it, it's very happy that it failed in getting you to do opposite of what you should do. Now, we also have in the Parsha the inyan of the Mon. Now, Reb Mendele Rimonov said, and many in Klal Yisrael do it, that the Tuesday Yom Shlishi before Parshas Beshalach, which is tonight and tomorrow, you're supposed to say the Parsha of Mon, which is like from Shlishi till, or from Chamishi till Shavi, twice, and then to say the Targum, the regular Targum, and that it's an unbelievable segula for Parnasa. And you come into Shomer Shabbos or to other places, and they have a pile of the sheets of what to say according to Reb Mendele Rimonov. It's all over the world, because that was his segula for Parnasa. People came to him and asked him for segulas. He would ask them, did you say the Parshas Hamon on Yom Shlishi, Parshas Beshalach? Now, as you know, the Mon, you were able to eat it and think of what you wanted it to taste like. But the pasuk says that the people saw the Mon. They said, Mon hu, ki lo yoda ma hu. They didn't know what it was. And they said, what's this? But the Choize of Lublin, Zechuso Yogen Aleinu, teach differently. He said that they called it mon because when the people ate the mon, that it internalized into them, it was a lechem abirim ochal ish. It was a heavenly bread. This wasn't a bread, like it says, that no person had to go, to the washroom, to the bathroom. This was something that became spiritual within, and it actually changed the image of their face. And they didn't know, kilo yada mahu, who is that? Their friends, their family, they didn't look the same after eating the mon. And when we internalize items of spirituality, it changes the whole scope and the panorama of what we need, both ruchnius and gashmius. When a person is careful with benching, and he benches from a siddur, and he benches with kavana, that's the biggest segula for parnasa. Because in the benching are all the secrets and all the segulas by saying the words and looking. And that's what the Choize said, that when they ate it, it became so, it elevated them to such a point that even physically they couldn't see. Kilo yoda mahu, they didn't know, who is that? And that's the reason that there was such an unbelievable change and metamorphosis and transformation of the people and the foods that we eat. Indeed, if you are mechaven, even any one of us simple people, to what the Arizal says we should be thinking while we're chewing the food, you don't taste the food. It's a fact. In other words, if you would say to someone, well, you're going to put the apple in your mouth, and while you're chewing it, you're never going to taste the apple. And the person will say to you, how could that be? That's an impossibility if you have it in your mouth. Try it. You will see that whatever's in your mouth, you will not taste. And that power of food, which we have part and parcel of our lives, morning, afternoon, and night, can change our whole mahus and our whole destiny if we make the bracha rishoina, the bracha achroina, and a touch of what you're supposed to think of while eating. It can elevate you to the highest of high. And because it's my mother's yortzeit, I just want to conclude with one very quick thing. For those of you who have had the schos to be able to learn Zohar, and it's not for everyone, and as we know, Chazal say if you're not 40, you shouldn't be learning it. Today we learn part of it and things which we don't wait till 40, but it has to be with Kedusha. You have to have a mikveh before. You can't just go do it like a sandik is a sandik. He has to go to the mikveh. He's mamshech Kedusha on the child. So it says in the Zohar, it quotes Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, and his friends Reb Abba and this one and that one, and it quotes the Tinnik. Who was the Tinnik? Tinnik means baby. That there was someone who was very great, one of the Tanoim. But as he said Kaddish, for someone who died, he wasn't mechaven properly by Yehei Shmei Rabbah. So he did Kol HaTorah Kula, he was a Tana, and he was only 5 or 6 or 7, he was literally a baby, maybe 4 years old. And when he's quoted in the Zohar, he says, the Tinnik, Amar Ahu HaTinnik, the Tinnik said, and he participated in the conversations with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and with everything, because the tziruf of what we're supposed to think when we say Yehei Shmei Rabbah, which the simple meaning and that kavanah is like the Gemara says, you can tear up a gezer of 70 bad years with one Yehei Shmei Rabbah with tremendous kavanah. And that's wonderful and that's enough. But if someone goes a drop further, he had to come back and live as a tinnik. And when he learned how to properly have Kaddish said, his neshama went back to the Gan Eden Ha'elyon, and he didn't have to be here in Olam Hazeh anymore. Anyway, my mother should have a lichtike Gan Eden and be a Malitza Yosha for every member of the family in Gans Klal Yisrael. She was always busy driving people. She didn't have money. She wasn't a rich lady, but her mitzvahs were unbelievable. There were we didn't even know it. By the Shiva, we had people coming in who were sick and said, I've been going for the last 3 years every week to the doctor. Your mother took us. How am I supposed to go now? We never knew that she was taking people to the doctor every day. And to the oil, to the kever of tzaddikim, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and to others. So anyway, I want to say that her neshama should have an aliyah, and we should see her shortly by Tchias HaMesim.